Hi guys, Travis here, Perth Diesel Performance. Today we're going to run you through the DIY installation of our 200 series touring power solution and the wiring harness we've got here and all the supplementary goodies. Basically what it's going to do is going to run main battery feed, auxiliary battery feed. It's going to do your tow pro, it's going to run power into your vehicle. It's going to give you the Anderson plug that's going to switch through a solenoid, so it's switch through ignition. It's also going to give you power feed down to the rear for ESP, and also all your hot feeds into your trailer plug. So it's got all your wiring solution covered for your touring needs. Once again, it's going to power your twin USBs, fridges in the back, compressors in here, and also for those people that want to upgrade to running a BMS 30 or a larger lithium setup in the back of the car, you then can take away the auxiliary battery feed and convert that to running a battery charger for that lithium battery bank. So let's jump into the video, run you through all the components in it, what's in it and how to fit it. Okay, so let's have a look at the Loom front to back. Let's run through what it can do and what's in it. So at the front here, you're going to see we've got M, that's your main battery feed, Anderson power feed, and we've got the auxiliary power feed. This will go on a triple fuse holder mounted on the auxiliary battery. Then we're going to get the power supplies from it. This lead here also, we've got our power feeds that are going to run to the tow pro, resettable circuit breaker, so it's a bolt on, and then also we've got our hot wire down to the trailer plug, 7-pin flat or round or 12, whatever you do want set up there. Also this power here is not terminated. This is for ESP. A lot of caravans now have stability control, so we've put the provision in there to use it however you need it for your kit and your van. The wire's all in there. This wiring lead here, you see these extra lengths, this is what's going to run into the cab. We've got power supply for the tow pro, we've got a brake feed down to the back, and we've also got our brake feed to run the tow pro coming up from the rear of the vehicle. We've got 2 extra spare feeds into the vehicle, one's main, one's auxiliary. So if you want to run like a UHF radio or power supply to run a external GPS or something like that, we've got options off both batteries. Now, so that's the front of the vehicle covered. Obviously, you're going to run the Loom front to back in the vehicle. This one here, you're going to see main and auxiliary. These two are going to come up through a sealed gland through the floor in the back of the car. This one here is going to run down to the back of the car. This is our Anderson 50 amp Anderson plug that's down the back. You'll see everything's crimped and soldered. Once again, that's our hot feed into the trailer plug, brake signal feed to activate the brakes. This is our feed to feed the tow pro to tell it that you are braking. We tap into it at the back of the car, and once again the ESP wire. So once you can see, one compact Loom, all made, heat shrink, solid corrie. And so now let's run through the other components and what's in it. We'll give you a pan through that. Okay, so we've got the smaller components in the kit to run through. Starting at the front of the vehicle, we do run a red arc solenoid. We mount it onto one of our stainless steel brackets as well. Also, we've got our 20 and 30 amp circuit breakers. Once again, they mount to our brackets, so minimum holes drilled on the vehicle. Anderson plug's going to be mounted down the rear, all pre-terminated, and heat shrunk cables for the power supply of these guys. Got the earth lead on the rear for the Anderson plug. All the fuse cables, appropriate cables to go to your triple fuse holder that's going to go on your auxiliary battery kit. We've got our tow pro that's going to mount under the dash on a mounting bracket there as well. Now in the rear of the vehicle, we've got a twin USB and also got a 12 volt power outlet. We are going to put them in the rear of the vehicle in a low impact area that you can change them as decided. With our fitting off little fittings here as well, nuts and bolts and so forth. We've got a stainless steel bracket that replaces the factory bracket on the rear, and we've got the Anderson plug, and we've got a hole there for your airbags. You can double stack the Anderson plugs and obviously put your safety Dave on there as well. So, and the extra connector, I must mention as well, you do need an extra connector for your ESP in the rear as well as your Anderson plug, so hence why we've got the extra plugs on there. You can double stack them like I mentioned, put your safety Dave on there. So let's jump into the vehicle. We're probably going to start at the front of the car, feed the Loom from the front to the rear, and then run you through step by step how to get it in. Okay, so we're at the driver's side of the vehicle at the front of the car in the engine bay. So we've got the Loom. We're just going to unravel. We're not going to cause pigtails in it. We're just going to lay it out. in the end result, this is going to sit along here and come up to our triple fuse. This is going to run around the back of the battery, around here, come up to the solenoid. This loom here, the one that's got a bit of length in it, we're going to go under here, through the grommet in the firewall, and this larger loom is going to track down the guard, down in a nice place. We're going to secure it out of the way, down the chassis rail, feed it down to the back, and feed it through the floor, through the grommet. So let's get on with that. So now I've got the cable end that's going to the rear of the vehicle. I'm just going to tape up the wiring just to make it all go together. As I'm dragging it through under the vehicle, it's going to not get caught up on anything, not going to damage the ends of the cables, and I'm not going to nick any of the insulation. Alright, that should be enough. Not too much, otherwise you're going to have fun getting it off. So now we can start feeding it down there. Okay, so for video purposes, we have removed the air cleaner box just so you've got a really good visual where we're going with the cables and the end result, so you can see where they're pinned out. So as you can see, we've just started to feed this down. Sometimes it is handy if you've got someone to feed the cable at one end while you're dragging it through on the other end, just so you're not forcing it anywhere. So we'll get on with feeding that through and running it down the chassis. Just go a bit slower. Yeah. Just got the wider bit coming through. Now we've got the cables roughly in place. We're going to put a pull cable through the firewall. So once again, we're going to get those to the same length. Get a bit of insulation tape. And tape all these cables together so when we pull them through, they come through as a pair. Now, to get it through the grommet, we have got our dual battery kit wiring already through the firewall. Bit of silicone spray is going to assist us to get this through. So we're going to drag that through, and literally you're going to pull the wiring through till it starts coming onto this heat shrink core here. Then we're just going to make it suit where it needs to be. Then we can start pinning off the cable, and also making sure that this end we haven't made it it's too short, it's too far in the cab. Just going to make sure everything's laid out right. So let's get the pull cable ready and we'll get this wire into the cabin. Okay, so we're just going to gently feed this pull cable through, just a light bit of pressure on it till you find you've got it coming through the other side. There we go. Now I've got a fair bit of it through. One note I want to make is to make sure that you haven't got, now I've got all this cable that's all connected, we haven't got it wrapped around something and it's around a fuel hose or around a wiring harness it shouldn't be. So it's going to go in and be nice and neat and it's easy to work with. So we'll put some silicone spray on here and we'll drag it into the vehicle. So we just got some silicone spray. Just going to get this end here. Okay, so what we're working out then is getting on the right side of other cables under the dash. So I've got Aaron just slightly pulling this through for me. Keep going your way, you're right. Just slow down, I'll just put a bit more silicone spray on. Okay, you're right, go your way. Just slow down. Yep. Keep going. Alright, it's just gone through. Alright, your way. I just want to hang on 2 seconds. Alright, keep going your way. Keep going. Bit more. Bit more. You're coming up to the heat shrink now. Yeah, a bit more your way. That should do you about there. So just with a little bit of silicone spray under there, it's just made that so much easier to feed the cable in. There's a bit of silicone and slippery stuff around here, but we'll get this zip tied up now, and then we'll check the lengths onto the battery terminal up here, and then we can continue on, and we know down the back there's a little bit of room to move as well, so we'll push on with that. Okay, so we're just going to prep now the fuse holder for the front of the vehicle so we can check the lengths of the cable before we zip tie them off. We need 6 of these little grip nuts for the fuse holders, and there should be 6 little bolts, 6 little nuts. Now the fuse holder is going to sit in the front of the vehicle. That's the stud, and these are going to sit here. This is going to be the driver's side of the guard. I'm going to put them opening this way, so when you're standing on the side of the vehicle, you can open them towards the inside of the engine bay and see what you're doing. So before we do that, I'm just going to click the fuse holders together. Hopefully you didn't lose everything off the bench. And you'll see the little dovetails, they all just clip together nicely there. And now we can go along, start all these little M4s, get them all started before we do them all up. And this is one of those moments where we say, you know, check it twice before you continue on. We don't want to pin all that wiring to the chassis and get up the front last to terminate the fuse holders, and we find we're an inch too short with our wiring. So okay, so got the fuse holder all prepped up. We're going to take off the double nut on the J-hook on our battery kit we previously installed on this vehicle. I'm going to drop the fuse holder on there, it's going to locate on there, and then it's going to secure like that. And like I mentioned, fuse holders are going to open away from me towards the engine bay. So now we can prep this little guy here. Which we're going to terminate last. The main reason for what we're doing now is just to get the lengths right. So now these can go any order, it's just depending what suits and how it sits. Now we probably can see them jumping around and what have you, just because we haven't got anything secured as such. So I'm just going to put the little nuts on there just to keep them in place, and then keep the wiring. One thing you want to notice is I have got the airbox out, so it is easier to get this wiring under with the airbox out. You can, however, push this wiring. There is a gap in the airbox, but obviously there's a lot of aftermarket airboxes on the industry, so it's probably going to sit somewhere along the lines of that, and a zip tie along here, and down here, depending on your entry point, snorkels and what have you. So that may differ from vehicle to vehicle, and we'll start zip tying this off now, and we'll move on with the zip tying the wire down the chassis, and we'll start getting on with the rear of the vehicle. Okay, so we're just going to get into the wheel arch. We're going to remove the inner wheel arch trim, and we're going to guide the cable further down. Okay, so we've got the vehicle down from the engine bay. We're just going to feed it over the chassis rail, so we're on the right side of the chassis rail. And then we're going to go under the vehicle and secure it well away from any heat sources. So in the end, the cable is going to get tied around, secured around here, and more or less it's going to sit along there, right out of the way, if you can see that. So we'll just go under the vehicle. Okay, so we're under the vehicle. We've got the cable down here. You've got the vehicle brake lines here. This is our deep breather kit, so don't be concerned about that. We're just going to secure it with this cable in one go. We're going to run down here, follow the chassis rail, and just keep going along. We're going to come on the top side of the chassis rail, and then we can get access from this side over here, run all the way down to the back of the vehicle, and then we're going to cross over. So once we've crossed over and run across the top of the chassis rail, see this is the handbrake line here, we're going to go over the fuel tank, so between the body and the chassis, over the fuel tank, and then end result is, just trying to see where you can get a good angle, you come around. So this is from the other side, the inboard side of the chassis. When it comes through here, I'm going to tie it to here, run along this coil mount, come around the back, over past the corner of the fuel tank. So you're going to come to the corner of the fuel tank here, run along the chassis rail, and once we come to the chassis rail, you'll see up here as well, you'll meet up with the gland that we're going to go in through to the bodywork, and then you'll cross over back over the chassis rail, and then the tow bar or trailer harness wiring is all going to come here with your Anderson plug, and we'll fit off our stainless steel version with all the extra wiring required. Okay, so at the back of the car, we've ran our cable all the way down the chassis and we've zip tied it off, which you've seen in the footage there. So we've got the Anderson power supply, hot pin, trailer plug, brake light pickup, and then our ESP wire. They're ready to be terminated right here at the back. So in a second we'll get on to wiring that, but I just want to point out where we have ran the cables. We've just come down the chassis rail. They're sitting on top of this chassis rail. I've got them zip tied in place. Earlier on you saw where we drilled the hole in the rear of the vehicle, so we're underneath the car now, and we've just poked the cable through the cable gland, and also this here can be tied up to this rear cable in the corner over here as well when we're finished. So now, one thing I want to point out though is this cable, there is a little bit of length in this, and the reason is factory tow bar goes here, so you can just shorten the cable up into suit. Now I would generally suggest not shortening this, because if you put a rear bar on the vehicle, you can get a little bit more length out of this cable, and if need be, come into the other side. So this is why it's a little bit longer and it works for different applications. So now we'll go ahead, we'll remove the factory steel bracket. You'll actually notice this car's near new, it's already starting to rust. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to fit off our stainless steel bracket that goes on here, Anderson plugs on it, and the airbag lines can go on there as well. So we'll get on with that and we'll get it all wired off. Okay, so last of all, done a check off in the rear of the vehicle. We're just going to put the trim clips back on at the front of the vehicle. So just reverse of how we put it off. Now, I am replacing these trim clips. They did break on me, so I'll just go and get one more for there, and job done on the wheel arch. We'll lower the car back down and we'll terminate up in the engine bay. Okay, so we're just going to get into the wiring harness, remove all this and bolt this up. Okay, so I've just dummied up the trailer bracket here. I've just put one bolt in here just to get it in place. Everything's loosely fitting. I've just undone the conduit, the factory Toyota loom. We've got our brake feed here, hot wire feed here, and our brake signal wire pickup. What we're going to do is we're just going to cut into the same corresponding colour wires in the Toyota harness. And one note I want to make is this customer has opted for a 7-pin trailer round trailer plug from Toyota, but we're going to use this at the black wire. Can be used as a reverse light feed, but in this instance we're going to use it as a hot power feed, so a 12 volt power feed through the trailer plug to charge your breakaway brakes. This may vary from vehicle to vehicle and setup, so just check that with what you're wiring. If you do want to keep the reverse light feed and also have a hot feed into the back, you will be requiring to use a 12-pin plug, so you get the extra plugs associated, so you can get more inputs and outputs through your trailer socket. So in short, we'll tee those into here, and then we'll tee off the ESP loom on this car. Isn't going to get used, so we'll just cap that off with a bit of heat shrink, and we'll loom all this up, and then we'll secure it all nicely as a finished project. Okay, so I've got to the point where I've snipped the blue wire, the black wire. I've spliced in the brake light feed, because obviously we still need the brake light feed to go into the trailer plug, and we're obviously just getting that for an input for our tow pro at the front of the vehicle. So you'll see where I've spliced in a bit of solder. I've just backed out the red wire here out of the trailer plug, and I'm now going to slide a little bit of heat shrink over that, tuck it all back in, and we'll put it all back together and tidy it up. Sorry, I've just cut the black wire here, the one you can see there, the blue wire, brake activation wire. I've cut and put our feed in that we've run from the front of the vehicle. I've spliced in the brake light feed. I've just back probed the red wire out of the 7-pin plug here, just so I can get a bit of heat shrink up the end of the cable here, just so it's nice and insulated. I've also, the blue and the black wire that I have cut in the loom, the factory loom, I've just put a bit of heat shrink, sealed the ends over, so then I'll feed the conduit back over it all, make it all watertight, tape it all back up together. You'll see here as well, I've got the earth eyelet ready to go onto the mounting point. It is here, the bolt that holds the bracket back up to this position here. We've terminated our Anderson plugs. Obviously you've got positive is the red, negative is the earth, and also I will seal off the ESP cable which is in our loom, and that'll just get tied back nicely as well, capped off. Okay, so almost a finished product here. Heat shrink crimps, so these are crimped and then they're heat shrunk. We've used a heat gun and there's resin lining in there, so it's sealed those connectors up. The red wire I have backed out of the trailer plug, out of down here, pulled it through, and I have spliced it with solder and then put heat shrink on it, so that loom will all go there. The two wires that I cut out of the factory loom to put our loom to feed the plug, I've just heat shrunk the ends of them, and I have capped the ends. You'll see these little flat sections on the end there. All that is the long nose pliers, and literally doing that when the glue's nice and hot, and it seals the end off nicely. ESP cable, or the other Anderson plug if you do need to use it, I've just capped that off as well. That's just going to get tied back. Customer hasn't opted to use that in this instance, but it's all there ready to go. This will get the split, this is like a split tube here, we'll go back on, put the trailer plug back together. You'll notice that I haven't got lots of heat shrink with the glue lining in it. Great product, really rigid, but one thing I've learned over the time, trailer plugs are a high service item. They're at the back of the car, you're going off embankments, you're backing boats in, saltwater corrosion. They are a serviceable item, so in that instance I haven't put a lot of heat shrink here, because you will want to get in there and change it at some stage. Put glue lined heat shrink in there, you're going to have a lot of fun getting it off, and you'll never get it to look right again. So I've decided not to do that, so that's why I haven't done that. So we'll just get onto this, bolt it back up, and away we go. A good little trick here as well, while you got the trailer plug apart, just quickly go over all the other screws. Just make sure they are nice and firm and got a positive connection. Obviously this vehicle is new, so we don't have any issues with corrosion. However, if it is a in-service vehicle, I would probably say look at the plug. If you've got it apart, possibly look at replacing it, because like I mentioned, they are a high service item. So pretty much we're just going to push that back. That little Phillips head there is going to locate in there, another locking screw, and away we go. So we're just at the final point, taped all the loom up, we've got it all nice and tidy here. Like I mentioned earlier, the factory Toyota bracket, this car's only done 1700 kilometres and there's already got this rust forming. This is why we've gone for stainless steel. That's why it's a standard across all of our products. Even if they do get powder coated, we still have a stainless product underneath. So this bolt that I'm now starting, the little 10mm head, it does have a locating shank in it. That's the first one you're going to put in. Now I've just left it a little bit loose. Then you're going to go with a 12mm headed bolt. Okay, so I'm just starting the 12mm headed bolt. I've just had to line it up. That's what I was saying, leave it all loose. All the bolts are finger tight, so to say, and I'm just getting it to sit where it is nicely. The bracket that does run this 12mm headed bolt goes from left to right of the bumper. If you can't get it to line up sometimes, you can loosen the bolts across here, and that bracket sort of slides around a little bit. So it is an independent bolt to the chassis. So one bolt hole we are using is the chassis, and one is the bumper assembly. So there is slight misalignments there. And then the earth bolt, last of all, we're going to come around once we've got the wiring where it finishes, and we're just going to put another bolt in here, and that's our earth point. And then we'll pin out our wiring with some zip ties and secure it all nicely. Okay, so we're just doing that other earth bolt up here. So obviously in some instances, if you don't have a good earth, you might want to check that with a meter and just make sure you don't have volt drop or a bad earth. Obviously this vehicle's all clean and tidy. Check the earths are okay. And then we're just going to pin our wiring up out of the way as high as possible. That way you get as much clearance to the back of the vehicle. And under here will be job done. Okay, so we've got our bridging bar for our fuse holder. The reason we've got that is we've got one main battery feed in, and then we're splitting it to two 40 amp MIDI fuses mounted on our bracket here to replace the ARB 40 amp fuse. I'm going to shorten this lead up, and then we'll go on with our earth. So first of all, we're just going to put the bridging bar. You see these tabs are offset. That's going to sit on there. The 40 amp, I'm going to put the clear facing out, so if you do get in there with a light, and the right way up too, so if you ever need to see, hey, what size fuse was that I used or anything like that, you know. Alright, so they're sitting on there. The main, which is obviously our main battery terminal, is going to come around, just a little bit warm from soldering. It's going to come onto this one here, and then the auxiliary is going to come onto here, and finished product they're just going to be sitting in situ, and then we'll have it all tied up out of the way. So end result is our power feed is all into the back of the car and ready. What we'll probably do is we'll just extend a bit of heat shrink onto here, just so we don't have any rubbing or anything like that. Obviously we do leave these leads longer. You can shorten them if need be for your application or however you're going to power different setups, because obviously we do sell this kit without ARB compressor and what have you, so you can pull them to a draw system however you want. So we're just going to extend a bit of heat shrink onto here, and away we go there. And then we'll go ahead and we'll cut this loom back out of the ARB compressor. We'll do our earth plug onto here, so we'll get on with that. Okay, so I'm just doing a rough size up at the cables. I'm going to give us a little bit to play with. I'm going to chop it about here. So literally nothing's live. So you can see now we've got the positive feeds out. Our wiring harnesses, and then zip tie that out of the way. And actually the one you don't want to forget is this little earth. So when you're lugging this earth, you want this little one inside of it as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll give ourselves a bit of length to work with, terminate that, and Also, you can always push these cables down and they'll be fine to come across to there as well. Remember, the trim comes right along the floor here, so having a bit of cable in here is easy to work with. So now we'll lug all the ends on that. So I've just separated the two wires, so the positive and the earth, and now I'm just heat shrinking down, so I've got a full loom. Use the heat gun, then I'll come and solder these lugs that I've just put on. So obviously when you're dealing with heat shrink, you want to put the heat shrink on first and then put your lugs on. Beauty with this heat shrink though, it is 3 to 1, so you do get away with a bit more than you would with a normal heat shrink that's 2 to 1. And what that means is this heat shrink I'm using is 9 to 3, so it goes from 9mm down to 3mm. So it's 3 to 1, whereas 2 to 1 would be 9 to 4.5, so you don't have as much working range in it. And you'll see obviously it started quite large. You do have to get a bit of temperature in it and then it just starts shrinking down. So a good thing with heat shrink too, while it's still warm, if you want to form it into a particular shape to get it somewhere, when it cools down it'll actually hold that shape. So once I've actually terminated and soldered these, I can put it in there. If it's a bit too rigid, you can lightly warm it and the glue will hold a bit of memory. So what we'll do now, we'll solder these, but end result, this is going to come around that way. Earth is, I've given the earth a bit more length, and it's going to come around and it's going to go into this earth point here. The ends are still going to get a bit more heat shrink. We're going to obviously crimp them, solder them, and then we're going to put heat shrink from there to there, and it's protect the tails as well, and make sure it's a very rigid connection, so we're not going to have any issues with it by vibrations, corrugations on the tracks. Okay, so we've done all our wiring here. You see we put black heat shrink on, crimp the ends. We put some red heat shrink on here after we've soldered our terminations. Just going to put the little nuts to hold the M for main, comes down here, and we've put that bridging bar, so obviously we've got a twin feed off our main battery. Just holding these, being careful not to drop them. Alright, and then we're going to sit these two in place. So you're trying to do it with the camera next to me so I can give you the best view possible. One on. There we go. Get those nuts on. And sit everything in place. Generally speaking, I like to get my cables to follow this factory loom here, because you can put a little tie on there if you want to, so they're nice and neat. Make sure everything's alright, and then we can go along and do these up. And then the earth, like I mentioned earlier, loop him back around, a bit of a twist, and we're going to go back onto this bolt. Sorry, just get a 10mm socket. So just off camera, I ended up swapping the fuse and the cable lugs around the other way. The reason I've done that is actually, if you want to change the fuse, you can just undo the nuts and take the fuse off. You're not having to take the cable off to replace the fuse. So now I'm just going to go along and start this last one. And we'll position all the lugs so they're in the correct orientation. Once you're happy with them, just using an 8mm deep socket, and I am just tightening up all the fuse holders, and that is job done in there. Just put one more zip tie here, and then we'll route the earth. We'll just put one more zip tie here once we've finalised our ignition feed and done our final switching wire. So we've got our 2 trigger wires. We're going to put a spade terminals on these guys, and we'll get our ignition feed from the other side of the vehicle, which will just refer to our instructions. It'll have all in there where to locate that as well. And we're just going to run a bit of single core wire from the left hand side of the vehicle to get the ignition pickup. Okay, so we've got our length of gas cable, which is a 3mm single core, but it's double insulated. So that's going to run from the compressor. We're going to run it along the factory loom. End result is it's just nicely going to go along there, and come up in behind this trim. Now to get this trim off, it's got much the same as the other side, little push down clip down the bottom here. I've flicked off this little clip trim in here, just in there, flat blade, poked him out. 10mm quarter drive, or you can use a 3/8 socket. I'm just going to undo the seat release handle. Now we're not going to remove this trim fully, we're just going to partially dislodge the clips out enough just so we can get behind, connect our ignition feed up, and also while we're here we're going to pop this trim out for our installation of the USBs, Anderson plugs, USB SIG sockets or Merit plugs. This trim, you can see in my hand, is the one from the driver's side. Now behind, you see this opening in here. This is where there's a nice little easy spot to drill a hole, drill a hole with a hole saw or a step drill. End result is these sockets are going to be mounted in here and fused back over at our accessory power feed. Now the reason we're drilling these into these trims is if you don't like it or you want to change, this trim you can buy from Toyota, and you can put it all back to factory if your situation changes in the back of your vehicle. If you go for draw systems and you want sockets down lower, you can replace them or leave them there as blanks. So let's remove this trim. See, gently it just more or less pops away, easy enough. We don't need too much room to work with, just need enough to get behind it, and end result is an ignition feed. We'll double check with the meter, but it should be this green wire in the back of this connector, which we can, if you see here, we'll just double check with the meter and make sure we've got the right one before I give you the wrong advice, but we'll check that and we'll show you what we've got to do. And then obviously I can pop out this top clip trim here as well. We'll drill them, pop them back down, and we'll run our cable over to the other side all in one go. So we'll get on with that. Okay, so we've just done a test with a multimeter. This green wire at this connector here, this one right down here, we've just worked out, well, checked that it is ignition feed. So what we're going to do is just nick that tape away, or you can unwrap it. Just get some cutters. So this green wire, like I mentioned earlier, is ignition. So we're just going to unravel some of this insulation, which we can go further, a little bit more up here. Get a bit more room. Untape that. We're going to splice in, and we'll get the length right on this gas cable, and this will be our ignition pickup. The fuse location for this ignition pickup is on the left hand side fuse box inside on the 200 series. double check that on your particular vehicle that the ignition source is correct and does work. So now we'll solder that splice in, and then we'll move on. Okay, so I want to make mention, we're going to solder, I'm going to do a little splice and tape them in. However, we have seen kits that come with these not so great items. People call them scotch crimps, cable connections. They don't belong in my shop. All we do with them is do this, and we are going to solder that in and do it properly. If this joint was cut and spliced, we would heat shrink it. We are just going to tape it up, and then we're going to put the cloth insulation back over the top. Okay, so we're about to pop the trims back on. We're going to just drill the holes for our accessory sockets here. We've got this pre-terminated loom, ignition feed's done, got all our zip ties tied off with our cables out of the way. We're just going to continue to tidy that up, and then we'll work on the driver's side. So we'll just cut some zip ties flush. Obviously the last trim that's going to go back on along here is going to be the dress trim that goes along the bottom here in reverse order of removal. So obviously it was the first piece to come off. When you push these trim clips on as well, one thing to point out, just make sure this cable here isn't caught anywhere. And another note to make is these white trim clips can sometimes stay in the bodywork holes. So they do slide on. So if you look around here, they do just slide into the holes. So just be mindful that they haven't popped out, and when I get it back on, when you push the trim back on, you'll hear it clip on there, that you don't just hit it and break the clip and it's not sitting correctly. So just line up all the clips. That's nice, it's not jammed. Sometimes you might just need to lift the trim a little bit, just making sure once again. Then this seal, you can pull him out of the way. And just once again the cable, and then we're going to refit one trim clip in there. Just make sure your rear tailgate seal is all on, and happy days on this side. Just got this to connect and we're done on the passenger side of the vehicle. Okay, so we've got our accessory power harness that's going to power up our twin USB. It's going to mount on this side now, on the driver's side. Got a triple fuse holder. Look, that's about as many fuse holders as I would go in this setup, in the fact that this customer is just taking the rear drawers out, going to run a fridge in the back, just a bit of a weekend tour and towing vehicle. If you are going to run drawers, then we'd advise you wouldn't be running this setup. You'd probably go for something where you get your accessory power and come to an external fuse box. That's obviously because you've got drawers, things are a little bit more accessible, harder to get to, sorry. And we are going to run another 40 amp MIDI fuse on here just to keep it a bit of a standard. If you ever need a fuse for here, you've got the same there, or vice versa. And then we are going to put fuses appropriate for our socket, so 10 amp for this side, 10 amp for a fridge circuit, and then obviously this one is still to be terminated up to this connector. Then we have a length of cable that, while we've got the rear of the vehicle apart and we said we're turning this electrical setup into a perfect tourer, this is going to run the power supply up through the roof. We're going to come through the roof grommets. We're not going to go external or put it through the door hinge or anything nasty. We're going to feed it through these grommets. We're then going to poke it through. We're going to have these trims off. We're going to run around the outside. We're going to show you how to take all these off, and we're going to mount our strip light that goes on here. The reason we're going for a strip light is because when you're standing here, you're looking in the fridge, or you've got a drawer slide, you've got a single light there like a Rock 9 or a Rock 40. Two things: the Rock 9's good power consumption, but you don't get enough light and it's very focal. Rock 40, heaps of light, high on power consumption. The strip lights, however, if you're standing here, you've got the light from that side coming over your shoulder. Same thing, reflects a lot of light out the back of the vehicle, and best of all, the switches are on it. so that covers that. And obviously the key feature with the light that we're going to use, it's got red and white LEDs. So we'll get all that fitted up, we'll remove these trims, and we'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've just undone the earth again for another time, but we are going to keep one central earth. So obviously all the electrical set up in the back, you've got one earth point to go to from a diagnostic point of view. So we're just going to take that off, and I've previously already routed it to a point where I was happy. Just get this thread started. Okay, so that's loose. We'll see here, 2 earths coming along, and then end result, it's going to sit in now. I've left this with a bit of length, so if you do need to pick it up, change your fuses, you can, but it's just going to sit down and gravity will take its effect sitting there. You can put an extra zip tie in there. Just bear in mind, if you do need to actually service these and get through these hatches, the service hatch to get to the jack, it's going to be harder to work with, so that's a bit of a personal preference. So we'll just do the earth up, and then I'll continue to run our cables up and over for our twin USB that we had here, I mentioned earlier, and obviously our light and the tailgate. Okay guys, I just want to make special note, the trailer plug and options, there's lots on the market. So obviously we've got a 7-pin round here, which is 7-pin round small, 7-pin flat, there's a 12-pin that's got larger pins in it, there's a 7-pin large socket. So it all depends on the electrical loads on your trailer setup, what you're towing and what you actually need. This particular setup, we fit it off as per customer specifications. However, if you need the larger sockets and the cabling needs to be upgraded, one thing you need to revisit is probably the earth circuit. So just bear in mind, you need to have a look at that when you're wiring it up. So that's just a bit of a tech tip there I want to let you know as well. So we're back up at the front of the vehicle. We've terminated in the rear of the vehicle our power supplies. So like I said, we've come back up to the front. We're now going to terminate our hot feeds and our tow pro feeds, and last of all we'll put these onto the fuse holders, and we're going to remove these trims. Obviously the battery's going to come out of here, and we're going to mount our isolating solenoid over on the driver's side. So to do that, it's going to be much the same principles as removing the battery on the passenger side, the main battery, and putting one of our SPI brackets in there. So we'll get into that, and we'll take you through that step by step.